The recommendation is that the minutes of January 18, 2022 meeting of Committee of Adjustment be approved. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Councillor Barfoot. Is there any discussion of the motion before us? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the motion? The motion is carried. We're down to new business. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up here. I'm going to call the first public meeting to order. This meeting of the Committee of Adjustments to consider 3 applications for consent for Blair Rodburn and Sherilyn Rodburn under Section 53 of the Planning Act regarding property located at 130 Maple Ridge Road. Madam Deputy Treasurer, please go ahead with your review. You're muted.
Thank you. So there have been no requests for deferral or withdrawal of the application. Notice of these consents in accordance with Ontario Regulation 19796 made under the Planning Act was given on December 17th, 2021 by ordinary mail to all property owners within 120 meters of the property, which is subject to the application, and to all the required agencies. Notice was also posted on the subject lands and at the township's website. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the Committee of Adjustment, you must make a written request to the Deputy Secretary Treasurer. Only a person or public body that requests a notice of decision of the committee in respect to these proposed consents may submit an appeal.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Planner will please provide an overview of the application and the comments received to date. Madam Planner, please go ahead.
So the applications are proposing to create 3 residential lots within the settlement area of Balmy Beach. The proposed lot sizes meet the minimum lot area and frontage for partially serviced lots in the R1 general residential zone. So within the planning report, you'll see that there is a review to assess compliance with applicable policy. The review locates the subject property within the secondary settlement designation under the county and township official plans. And it also notes that a portion of the property is within the Niagara Escarpment plan area. So that portion of the property is not subject to these applications. As the report notes, provincial policy directs development to settlement areas. It identifies that settlement areas shall be the focus of growth and development. So the applications to create these 3 lots within that settlement area of Balmy Beach is supported by the PPS, Provincial Policy Statement, as well as both the county and township official plans. So the proposed development is considered infill development, and it will be partially serviced with municipal water from the East Linton water system and individual on-site septic systems. The county OP requires new development to connect to existing services. So if these lots are approved, they will be required to connect to that East Linton water system. The water main itself is located on the west side of Maple Ridge Road, directly in front of the proposed lots. And installation of the water services would be overseen by our operations department and would be subject to their permitting process. So through the circulation of the applications, we did receive several comments from our area residents, noting a lack of water pressure in their homes. So what staff did was we reviewed drawings for the water main, and we contacted our service provider, Aqua, to address neighbors' concerns. The comments we received back from Aqua indicate that for additional water services will not impact the existing water pressure to the Maple Ridge subdivision properties. It may, however, have a bit of an impact to the available pressure to the first few properties that are situated south of the Indian Acres Grey Road 1 area. However, in their comments, they note a pressure reducing valve can be adjusted to accommodate for that change in pressure. And some of the comments from the neighbors question who's going to pay, if the water main needs to be upgraded. There are no planned upgrades for the water main in this area within the next 5 years. As the report indicates, we are in the process of having a master servicing study done by GSS Engineering. And so when that report has been completed, then it will be brought to council for consideration and may identify areas that need to be upgraded, as well as a timeline for those upgrades. That's not part of this application, though. So the Conservation Authority reviewed the proposed application in the review of impacts to natural heritage features on behalf of the township, and they support the mitigation measures that are identified in the EIS, provided they're guaranteed within a site plan. So staff support this recommendation. A site plan agreement can be used as a tool to incorporate those EIS mitigation measures to protect the natural heritage features on that property. Staff also support their recommendation for stormwater controls to be identified in that site plan agreement, and for that agreement to be registered on title to the land so that the stormwater controls are implemented, certified, and maintained for subsequent property owners. With the inclusion of the EIS mitigation measures and stormwater controls within a site plan agreement, the Conservation Authority did conclude consistency with sections 2.1 and 2.2 of the PPS. I will note that through the part of the process in conducting an EIS involves a consultation and an establishment or establishing a terms of reference for that EIS. That's done before the study's conducted, and it's the Conservation Authority participate in that along with the environmental consultant, and that's a process that begins about 2 years before this document comes before council and committees. So the Conservation Authority are supportive of a 0-meter setback to the realigned EP zone as proposed for part of this development. The no development areas include appropriate setback allowances. So the proposed lots identify suitable development envelopes outside of hazard areas, and the Conservation Authority conclude consistency with section 3.1 of the PPS policies. I have included Conservation Authority comments in their entirety for the committee's review with this package. So the provincial policy statement encourages constructive and cooperative relationships through meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities to facilitate knowledge sharing and land use planning processes and to inform decision making. We circulated this application to various agencies, including the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We did receive comments back from them requesting the submission of an archaeological assessment. So the applicant has been advised of this and has confirmed that an assessment will be conducted. So in the absence of that archaeological assessment, it cannot be determined at this time that the applications are consistent with provincial policy In terms of a zoning review, the 3 proposed lots do meet the R1 zone provisions for partially serviced lots. This property was actually previously zoned planned development. It wasn't rural in our previous zoning bylaw, but through the when we brought our new zoning bylaw into effect, when it came into effect, it ended up rezoning that portion of the lands rural. It's not something we typically see in Georgian Bluffs within our settlement areas. If a property doesn't have a zoning, an as of right zoning permission, it's generally zoned plan development. So meaning that if there's an area of land that could be developed, we have its own plan development so that council has an opportunity to review proposed development applications for the use of that land. A rural zone isn't typically seen in a settlement area. So the zoning amendment application is necessary because it will facilitate the severances. So it changes the zoning to allow the lot creation to occur, and the zoning will be considered by council at the February 16th public meeting. So we did circulate the application to various agencies. Bell Canada and the Niagara Escarpment Commission both have no concerns. The Grace Level Conservation Authority have no objections to the approval of the subject applications, provided natural heritage and stormwater management are implemented through the appropriate planning tools. As an adjacent landowner, they do provide the following comment. The property adjacent to the south of the proposal is the Indian Falls property owned by the Conservation Authority. We respectfully request that the southerly property boundary along proposed lot 1 be clearly delineated, and we request to receive a copy of any survey completed in this regard. The County Planning Department, they defer to positive comments being received by the NEC and GSCA. They note that positive comments should be received from Georgian Bluffs building officials in relation to OBC requirements and long-term maintenance consideration for tertiary septic systems. The mitigation measures recommended in the EIS are implemented as conditions of consent or through Conservation Authority development permit conditions. Staff would suggest that should the applications be approved, that the mitigation measures be contained within a site plan agreement registered on title. And then mitigation measures are taken to ensure stormwater is managed on site. The county has no further concerns with the above applications, and they request notice of any decision rendered with respect to the application. The Risk Management Office note the property is not located within a vulnerable source protection area where significant threat policies apply and have no further comment. And the Saginaw Ojibwe Nation requested an archaeological assessment. They note that this area has extremely high archaeological potential, and they will need to be notified when the ARC assessment is initiated. And the applicant's agent is aware of this request. The City of Owen Sound did provide comments. They were submitted after the report deadline, and they requested a copy of the county's, townships, and conservation authorities' comments on the application, and they request a copy of any further notice respecting the applications. So all the comments were provided to the city as along with the planning report. The application was circulated to owners within 120 meters of the subject property, and we received comments from the following residents. As the planning report notes, this is just a summary of the comments. The complete submissions were attached in the agenda package for the committee to review. Ken and Norma Applin expressed concerns with new residential development resulting in impacts to the natural environment, the condition of the roads, area water pressure, and drainage issues. Barb and Dave Carrier listed questions regarding on-site drainage, access to the farm field on the retained lot, limits of tree cutting, repair of damage to roads caused by truck traffic, and preservation of the creek. Peter and Catherine Kaufman provided comments identifying concerns with services, being water and septic, stormwater management, environmental impact, climate change, health, safety, and rural lifestyle of the local residents, increased traffic into and out of the subdivision, Maple Ridge Road rehabilitation post-construction. They are in opposition to the applications. Laura Daniels expressed concerns related to surface water drainage and contamination of a spring-fed creek. Larry McLean and Jay Wigston expressed concern that the existing water infrastructure may not be able to accommodate the additional 4 connections. They are opposed to the applications if the infrastructure needs to be upgraded and the residents are billed for the upgrade. Aaron Murray expressed concern with the southern lot, did not specify the exact concern with that lot. Other concerns identified are related to the infrastructure required for the development. Sue and Chuck O'Reilly identified concerns with the fire hydrant adjacent to their property, noting it was decommissioned due to low water pressure, the impact of development on the road, the impact of development on the water course, drainage and natural heritage features. Carol Parsons noted concerns related to the size of the proposed lots, the access to lot 1, the impact of development on the road, drainage, aesthetics, and environmental impact. So in conclusion, the recommendation at this time is to defer the decisions on the applications until an ARC assessment has been approved for this site and an addendum planning report comes back. And Mr. Chair, through you, I would like to invite Ron Davidson and Laura Swanson to speak to the applications and to provide some more information on the proposed development.
Thank you, Madam Planner. Ron, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. First of all, can I be heard by everybody?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, who are listening from home, which I guess is everybody, my name is Ron Davidson. I'm a professional planner, just like Jen. And but in this case, I'm representing the owners of the subject lands, and that would be the Radbourne family. With us on the line tonight is Dennis Radbourne, and also as Jen had indicated, that's Laura Swanson, the civil engineer who prepared the site plans and the stormwater management report. She's with us, and she's going to say a couple words as well as soon as I'm done. Also on the line is John Morton. John is the wildlife expert who conducted the environmental impact study. John doesn't plan on saying anything in terms of a presentation, but if there are still questions regarding the natural wildlife issues, he'll be happy to try to answer those questions. I should point out that whereas Laura prepared the site plan, John had a significant role in that as well. Because John had a lot of recommendations from his environmental impact study that needed to be implemented, and that's done through the site plan. As Jen advised, we're dealing tonight with the severances, and tomorrow night council will be holding another public meeting to deal with the rezoning, which is it's basically one and the same in terms of the issues. Now, I thought I should advise that, and I've told Jen this and your other staff, I'm not available for tomorrow night's meeting. If I was, we'd simply be making the exact same comments tomorrow night and rehashing all of this. So I've advised your staff, Mr. Mayor, members of council, that we won't be participating tomorrow night. Maybe that'll save you some time. And I hopefully council does not find that disrespectful. I simply cannot make it. So my comments that I make tonight pertain to the severances, but they would apply to tomorrow night's discussion regarding the zoning bylaw amendment. They're one and the same. All these issues are related to one another. Yeah, I'm just going to say just a few things here. As you heard from your planner, the lands are designated secondary settlement area in the county official plan. They're not designated rural or agriculture, so these lands are not considered to be out in the countryside. They're within a designated settlement area where development is supposed to take place. At the local level, in your own official plan, the lands are designated residential, and that would apply that, again, some development will take place here. But it's not simple. It's not as simple as that. There's a lot of hoops and hurdles that one must go through, and Mr. Radbourne is in the process of jumping through those hoops and hurdles. A nitrate study was done at the request of township planning staff to make sure that the site is suitable for on-site domestic sewage treatment systems. So that study was carried out. A copy of that report has been filed. At the same time, the Conservation Authority wanted a stormwater management report to address, of course, stormwater management with regard to water quality and water quantity. And that report was done by Laura, and copies of that report have been filed as well. And then furthermore, Mr. Morton, he has conducted the environmental impact study. That's a rather intensive study that he looked at the site for over a number of site visits during a 7-month period. And his job was to make sure that development that does occur on the property is not going to be have a negative impact on any natural heritage features that exist on the subject property or the adjacent lands. So John has conducted that report. He has given his recommendations to Laura. And between the two of them, they've come up with a site plan that addresses stormwater and addresses the natural heritage features as well. Now, I'm not sure if the neighbors have had a chance to read all the reports that have been filed. I'm hoping if they haven't, they will, because a lot of the questions that were asked are answered in those reports. As Jen indicated, Grey Salvo Conservation Authority has conducted a peer review of both the stormwater management report and the environmental impact study, and they are satisfied. As Jen indicated, those reports and the site plan have to be implemented somehow, and that will be done through a site plan agreement that will be registered on title. The Niagara Escarpment Commission has advised that they have no objections to the proposed development. And you heard Jen say that the county is also in support of the applications as long as the Grey Salvo Conservation Authority is on board, and they are on board. Now, you've heard Jen talk about the neighbors' concerns. In a few minutes, Laura's going to address the technical ones with regard to engineering. I'd just like to say a couple more words and then I'll stop talking. There is an issue about increase in traffic. Well, if you introduce 4 new homes on this street, the traffic increase will be minuscule. Based on transportation standards, 4 homes would create the equivalent of 1 additional car every 20 minutes during peak traffic volume times in the early morning and after work. And I don't think you would notice 1 additional car every 20 minutes. There was a comment made that the lands are zoned rural and therefore residential lot creation might not be a good idea. Well, yeah, but they're designated residential, and as your planner indicated, it's somewhat interesting or different, I guess, that the lands are actually zoned rural now. But the official plan is the benchmark or the document that we look at for developing land. It says the lands are designated residential and therefore lot creation can be considered. One last comment, and then I will be done. There's a comment that maybe the lots are too small. Well, granted, the lots are not huge by any standards, but they're certainly large enough to accommodate a dwelling, a driveway, and a septic system. There will be restrictions placed on the amount of disturbed area that can occur on each property, and that's from our wildlife expert. So there's still enough room. But the new dwellings won't be humongous by any standards, and that's probably likely a good thing if you're a neighbor, because typically neighbors don't like to see monstrosity for houses next door. Mr. Mayor, that's it for my presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to Laura now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Go ahead, Laura, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Can you move a little closer to your mic?
Yep, I'll move a little closer. Is that a little bit better?
That's better.
Okay. So as Ron mentioned, I was involved in preparing the site plan, the grading plan, and the stormwater management report. So in order to prepare the stormwater management report, it involves addressing quantity and quality controls. So with quantity, what that essentially means is making sure that after the development happens, there's no more water leaving the site than what was happening before the development happened. And so to do that, I prepared a stormwater model using modeling software. I used the MTO data because it appeared that it would give me data for specific locations rather than say like Owen Sound or Wyerton. I also used values for the soils based on what we had gotten from the nitrate study, because the nitrate study involved some test pits being dug. Because in post-development, there's more impervious areas like from the driveways and the roofs, I needed to provide some kind of storage capacity. So I chose to use a grass swale because they're generally pretty easy to maintain. And also they provide good access for maintenance purposes as well. And because of the tree preservation areas that we needed to conform to, it seemed to provide the best option. So when I entered in all the data, I was able to get the post-development flows to control to pre-development levels. And the Conservation Authority had accepted the findings of the report and the parameters that we had entered into that we had used in the modeling. And Ron mentioned that we had completed, we had arranged to have a nitrate study done. It was done by another engineering company that specializes in hydrogeological services, and they completed the report, the nitrate study report, in conformance with the Ministry of the Environment's D54 guideline. And if there's, I guess, any other questions, I can answer them as they come up.
Thank you, Laura. I'll continue on with my script. 5 members of the public register with the clerk to provide comments in support of or in opposition to the application. I will now call upon each registrant to speak in order of their registration. Prior to submitting your comments to committee, please note your address for the record. The first person I'm going to call is Mr. David Lawless. David, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is David Lawless. I'm a resident at 106 Maple Ridge Road. So I'm speaking tonight in my capacity as a local resident, but my background is as an environmental scientist, having worked with the federal government and Parks Canada for many, many years. Thank you for the opportunity to the council to speak to you this evening. I've had a chance to read through the reports and the comments that have been provided, and I want to just give a kind of overview because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to kind of underline a few of the comments that have been submitted already and clarify some of the discussion this evening. So first, with respect to the environmental impact study, what was presented tonight is accurate in the sense that it checks the box in terms of the protocols have been followed. However, in my scientific opinion, it's not enough. 13 hours of monitoring over the course of only 3 seasons 2 years ago doesn't get an accurate depiction of what's actually at stake when it comes to the land. Some of you have had the chance to visit the property under discussion, or the parcels that are being considered. And it's by living and experiencing that land that you get to know what is actually using the area in terms of conservation as a patchwork, a corridor between the Great Salpo Conservation Area in the form of Indian Falls Conservation Area and the surrounding environment. So within the environmental impact study that was submitted to council, there was only 1 species at risk that was noted. However, that does not capture the breadth of the species at risk that are found within that study. And I'll list off, there's the endangered butternut tree, there are bobolinks, there's Blanding's turtles, snapping turtles, Jefferson salamanders, and red-headed woodpeckers, sandhill cranes, and other migratory species that use that property or that land that's undisturbed for essential critical habitat. So there's that information which is not accurately reflected within the environmental impact study. Second, with respect to the mitigation measures that were proposed within both the environmental impact study and the comments that Grace Sawbull Conservation Authority provided, it's unclear, first of all, if those mitigation measures will actually mitigate what is being disturbed, and second, how will that be managed or overseen? I don't know what the capacity in terms of on the ground monitoring and compliance is at the municipality, but if the mitigation measures aren't maintained, or if they're breached, are there even fines? You know, there's something like a 0.4 hectare allowance to cut the forest, but you know, if that isn't observed, then so what happens? And I think that's the kind of big question of like, these measures make sense on paper, but in terms of the actual implementation and practice of what's going to happen is another thing. Moving to the water pressure, I've lived in the area all my life, and the water pressure is absolutely dismal. It's a trickle as it stands right now. The property that I'm living in is actually just south of Indian Acres Road, so it is at, you know, it's already there's very little water that's coming out of the tap. So I can't imagine a world in which, if there's no planned upgrades, will this have I can't imagine it getting any better. In fact, it's probably going to deteriorate. In terms of the traffic pressure, I kind of contest a little bit of what was said about the mischaracterization of the traffic pressure. Having read the comments of the neighbors, their comments were not directed at the owners of the home. It's around the construction. So who's using the road for the development of those lots. And that's where I suspect many of the neighbors that have submitted comments that that is a main concern, and it certainly is one of my concerns as a local resident. So I think, and I mean, there's a lot more I could say. The GSCA, yes, it's given its approval tacitly, but also with conditions, and that needs to be stated. And what is that mitigation? And they're very clear about what those mitigation measures are. They talk about clearly delineated the plot boundaries. Unfortunately, the way in which that has been addressed so far is by spray painting all of the trees and kind of having a cavalier approach to the boundary itself. So I don't, it doesn't bode well in terms of the development going forward, and that's just my sense and opinion. But yeah, so the main questions are specifically around Son and the Saginaw Ojibwe Nation and how they are brought in at this stage is kind of curious, as opposed to the beginning where an archaeological study would have made sense at the beginning. These are some of my concerns that hopefully the council and others will take into consideration. So I'll yield my time to the other speakers. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, David. I will now move on to Ms. Mary McGinnis. Mary, you there, please? Go ahead, please. If you're there, you're muted.
I know, I've unmuted myself, and it's Mary Innes.
Oh,
is there another Mary McGinnis?
no.
Anyhow, I don't have anything to say at this time, so thank you. Okay, bye.
Thank you. All right, I'll move on to the next one is Peter and Ms. Catherine Kaufman. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and elected councillors and Township of Georgian Bluff staff for giving us this opportunity to submit and voice our concerns with the Radburn zoning amendment application to facilitate these severance applications. As mentioned, we are Catherine and Peter Kaufman. For more than 27 years, we have resided at 101 Maple Ridge Road. We chose to reside in the Township of Georgian Bluffs because we value and appreciate the natural beauty, clean, healthy environment, and rural lifestyle offered. We feel it's extremely important for the township and its residents to protect these attributes. We are lucky to live in this environmentally rich area, and in doing so, we are obligated to maintain the delicate balance of promoting and protecting the area. The proposed application would create 3 lots directly across from us. As stated in our written submission, we are in strong support of the Township of Georgian Bluffs denying this application and retaining their existing RU zoning with the expanded EP zone to account for the no development area as recommended by the environmental impact study. We also oppose the proposed 0 meter setback to the realigned EP zone. The RU setback should apply with the newly established EP zone on the portions of the subject land that the application pertains to. Not only is the proposed R1 zoning not appropriate from a lot intensification perspective, but it would also expand the style of home that could be built to include semi-detached and detached dwellings. So both the increased density with smaller lot frontages and the expanded form of dwelling that would be permitted does not conform with the existing lots and detached dwellings that exist in the subdivision today. This makes us question why this application is being made. Is it for the betterment of the community and the environment? We don't think so. Planning objectives should consider how spaces can be improved and not ruined to create a better quality of life for everyone living in the community. Is it desirable and compatible? We don't think so. Any development should work well with the landscape. Does it complement the township's identity as a rural community and its vision to preserve rural lifestyle, residential lifestyle, and natural landscapes? Again, we don't think so. We believe the RU designation was done in a purposeful and conscientious manner by the township when the plan of subdivision was being contemplated and approved. The need and justification to change the conservative, balanced approach the township applied to provide their residents an attractive living environment and to ensure the natural resources and environment are protected has not been demonstrated with this application. And in fact, if anything, we believe with climate change, this has reinforced the prudent principles applied by the township with the RU designation. And it should be, the Township of Georgian Bluff should be commended for their commitment to climate change and striking a newly formed committee to tackle this growing concern. We believe the the policies laid out in the provincial policy statement, official plans, and local zoning bylaws are important to property owners when buying land so that property owners can be informed on what their neighbors or future neighbors could develop their property for in coming years. The plans also map environmental features that are protected from development. Because of the impact a change to the long-standing RU zoning can have on local residents of Maple Ridge subdivision, we are imploring that this application be denied. Grey County's planning policy indicates growth must ensure land use compatibility and encourage sustainable development that protects the environment and natural resources. To accomplish this, development must be done by taking a balanced approach. Development must be balanced with the attractive living environments, wise use of the land, and ensure the natural resources, agriculture, and environment are protected. The creation of 3 lots, in addition to the already existing retained site on the subject property, is just too intensive for this plan of subdivision. We do not agree that adding 4 residential homes is considered, quote, minor rounding out, end of quote, of an existing development. And we believe this has been recognized by the balanced approach that Council has taken with its current RU zoning designation, which conserves the features that help define the character of Maple Ridge subdivision. Secondary and tertiary settlement areas have lower density targets and are intended to provide a limited opportunity for growth. Where partial services exist, as is the case for the Maple Ridge subdivision, with only water services being provided by the township, development shall only be permitted to allow for the creation of lots subject to satisfying that the development is within the water system capacity. This was noted by Ms. Bennett with her opening remarks. The Ontario Clean Water Agency has indicated that the 4 additional water services may affect the first few properties situated south of Indian Acre Road, Gray Road 1 pressure reducing valve. Are these properties aware of this potential impact to them? What are the mitigating strategies should adjustments to the reducing valve not rectify the problem? And if that is a mitigating strategy, why has it not been implemented today when the local residents have been already voicing concerns with regards to the water pressure? It has been recommended that the water main in this neighborhood be doubled in size and replaced with a 150 millimeter water main. Due to the potential issue for the first few properties south of Indian Acres and Gray Road 1, and safety concerns that we have brought forward with the decommissioned fire hydrant, would it not be prudent and good planning for this work to be completed prior to any future development? Or perhaps adjusting the reducing valve at this point to see if in fact that does rectify our water pressure issues. Compatibility with surrounding residential development should be a primary consideration. It should occur in a manner that takes into account the existing built and physical environment. The most comparable lot in the subdivision to the application lands is Lot 8, located directly across the Maple Ridge Road from the application lands. This lot contains 1 single-family dwelling with the central area water course creek running along its north side yard. The frontage of this lot is 68 meters. The frontage of the proposed B12 and B13 lots would only be 31 meters and 38 meters respectively in order to squeeze in these 2 dwellings. Our lot is the subdivision is Lot 1 and located directly across the road allowance from the application lands. Our lot contains 1 single family dwelling with the southern area water course river running along the south side yard. The frontage of our lot facing the proposed Lot 1 is 61 meters. The frontage of the proposed B11 lot is 66.45 meters. This proposed lot is squeezed into an area that does not have proper road access off of Maple Ridge Road. Furthermore, the proposed R1 zoning would permit the style of the dwellings on these lots to be expanded to allow for a semi-detached and/or duplex, which is not compatible with the surrounding lands in the existing subdivision. The next most comparable lots in the subdivision to the application lands are lots 5, 6, 7, 10, and 11. Each of these lots contain, again, a single family dwelling with the creek running through their side yards. To help account for the creek hazard, their frontages are larger than the proposed B12 and B13 lots. As submitted by some of those property owners, even with wider lots to buffer the creek hazard and ditches, these lots experience standing surface water well into the month of June and have draining issues. The proposed zoning amendment from RU to R1 does not make an existing situation better or reduce the potential for exacerbating the flooding concerns the residents in the subdivision have, as these 3 lots would be located at a higher elevation than the existing homes in the subdivision. To deal with existing water drainage problems, my husband and I have already had to remove our front porch to do regrading, put in a weeping tile along the interior perimeter of our basement that drains into a sump pump, and professionally landscape our property to mitigate the standing water issues. Growth needs to be managed to minimize adverse effects on natural resources and features and be compatible with surrounding land uses. Have these tests been met? To support their application, the property owners were asked to submit several technical studies and reports, as mentioned, including the planning report, a nitrate study, stormwater management report, and environmental impact study. As written in our submission, we have several concerns with these studies and reports. To laymen, such as ourselves, it appears that these studies and reports were treated as red tape irritants or hoops and hurdles, as mentioned earlier, that needed to be checked off rather than the green tape protection measures they are intended to be for the residents living in Maple Ridge subdivision. Specifically with regards to the nitrate study, the study seems to employ a very minimal and weak sampling program to support this application. The test pits were located close to Maple Ridge Road, where the driveways for the proposed lots would be located, rather than back where the residential homes may be erected. Only 1 groundwater sample was obtained. The water levels were measured in August of 2021. You would think this study would include 3 seasons, or at the very least, the spring season when water levels are at their highest, particularly due to the concerns that the residents are experiencing with standing water on our properties. For the septic system, the nitrate loading considerations indicated groundwater flux was not considered in the nitrate dilution calculation, so the nitrate loading assessment is conservative. The nitrate study as completed and written to us is not convincing that the proposed 3 lots can accommodate the nitrate loading with a tertiary treatment septic system. We have also not seen comments from the building department on whether a tertiary treatment septic system is to code. The nitrate loading computation talks about, or the actual computation, the calculation is using 2,000 liters a day per lot in its calculation, but it's applying it to the total land area of 1.09 hectares, which is for all 3 lots. If we're using all 3 lots, should 6,000 liters per day of total sewage flow and volume of sewage effluent for all 3 lots not also be used? Or conversely, if only the daily flows of 2,000 liters for 1 lot are used in the calculation, should only the land area for each individual lot not also be used to determine the infiltration rate? So comparing apples to apples. The nitrate loading computation findings seem to be also misreported. The numbers transposed from figures 2 and 3 into the report do not seem to align. If the 9.8 milligram per liter is the correct figure that should have been transposed from figure 3, then the tertiary system barely satisfies the regulatory requirement of reducing the nitrate concentration to less than 10 milligrams per liter. And again, this 0.98 is based on 2,000 liters against the entire area, not 2,000 liters for that particular site. So due to the conservative nitrate loading assessment in the August study period, this is extremely concerning to us, and we would request a peer review of this study to be conducted. Obviously, this is not our field of expertise, but in just reading it and taking it at face value, it does pose a number of concerns. With regards to the stormwater management report, the existing drainage of the subject property slopes west, so from the escarpment to east, our settlement area, with the Indian Creek crossing through the western portion of the property. The majority of the water drains towards the central watercourse within the proposed development area. It has been identified that this central watercourse has fish habitat. It is proposed that the new lots will drain towards Maple Ridge Road allowance, with the existing ultimate outlet for the water remaining the same. The existing homes in Maple Ridge subdivision abutting the central watercourse experience standing surface water on their properties well into June. The existing outlet and drainage ditches do not adequately control the stormwater and groundwater today. Our property, as I mentioned, is situated adjacent the valley system featuring Indian Creek along the south of our lot and the road allowance along the west of our lot. We too experience surface water into June and try to manage the situation naturally through landscaping, grading, interior weeping tile, as I've mentioned. Any additional surface groundwater as a result of the removal of woodlands, vegetation, and soil, coupled with the development of potentially 4 residential dwellings, septic systems, and pervious surfaces poses a major risk to the existing residents of Maple Ridge subdivision and those downstream. We all know water has to flow somewhere when its course is altered, and if interrupted, it will find a new path. The grass swales will need to be used to mitigate the lack of space for a management pond to the storm management water. Will protective measures be put in place to ensure the ditches and swales put in along the roads do not interfere and harm the root system of the large maple trees growing along the road allowance and our property? A less intensive development of the property will ensure disturbance to the natural woodlands, vegetation, and soil is minimalized and help with water absorption. Section 7 of this report also identifies that the maintenance that would be required to support the proposal. It indicates that maintenance of the grassed swales must be maintained by the township and inspected each spring and fall and after major storm events. Any accumulated settlement should be removed. Is the township able to commit to this needed maintenance program or the monitoring of a site plan agreement to ensure the ongoing maintenance is being performed? This creates a dependency on future responsible landowners and a vulnerability to the residents of Maple Ridge subdivision. It is a fact that the pre-development water flows experienced by the residents living in Maple Ridge subdivision today already create concerns for our properties. Any additional ground surface water as a result of the removal of woodlands, vegetation, and soil, coupled with the development of 4 residential dwellings, tertiary septic systems, and pervious surface poses a major risk to us. The post-development flow projections in the report are based on predictions and estimates using Grey County soil and drainage maps from 1983, 2010 rainfall data, and June 2021 site samples from the subject property. June is a relatively dry month, and when the standing water problems the residents experience begin to dissipate. It is strongly encouraged that another study be completed using the springtime, April and May samples from the subject property. The report recommends approval authorities support the, I won't go into that. With regards to the environmental impact study, our comments, we agree with the comments that David has already made this evening, so we won't go in and rehash those comments that he has made. The EIS provides site-specific mitigation measures that seem to address concerns at the time of development for the 3 natural heritage features identified, but it does not speak to how these lands and habitats are to be protected after development, as mentioned by David, and how they are going to be maintained afterwards. An alternative development concept would be a less intensive, focused residential development of the 2 development envelope areas that permits 2 instead of 4 building sites. This mitigated measurement was not put forward in the EIS, but it should be considered and given heavy weighting to. By the township adopting the RU zoning for these sensitive lands adjacent to natural heritage features, they have set an appropriate standard for buffer planting, setbacks, permitted uses, and style of dwelling. And as stated in Grey County's official plan, we need areas for people to interact with nature without overwhelming it. We note no comments have been made with regards to the County of Grey and Grey Bruce Health Unit's healthy development checklist. We feel that this is an important policy statement and should have some consideration given to it. Again, we mentioned climate change and commend Georgian Bluffs for committing to increasing the township's resilience to climate change and reducing our contributions to the global climate to build a better future by establishing the Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Committee in October. But to be a climate conscious community, it takes action and commitment, not just words. It includes the township evaluating its decisions and actions through a climate action lens to reduce air pollution and improve health, conservation of our natural heritage, and ecological conservation and sustainable land use planning. It involves strategies to develop and achieve greater resiliency, safety, and well-being. With that, I will just, in closing, thank you again for allowing us to voice our concerns, put forward our position that this application should be denied. We strongly suggest that retaining the existing RU zoning with the expanded EP zoning to account for the no development area recommended in the environmental impact study is the desirable and prudent approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, for your great comments. Just want to point out to you, this meeting is recorded. Staff are listening to all your concerns and taking notes, just so you know.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to move on to our next person. Is Mr. Chuck and Ms. Sue O'Reilly. Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and councilors of Georgian Bluffs. We appreciate the opportunity to speak about our concerns. Certainly, David and Kate and Pete have done a great job, I think, of identifying a lot of the very technical aspects that frankly are probably beyond quite a few of the residents here in trying to understand that some of the implications. And so we appreciate those two folks doing all that legwork and identifying those. There are a couple things that in reviewing the reports from a much less technical perspective that I wanted to point out. I did note in one of them that it mentions that some of these water courseways are intermittent. That is definitely not accurate. And I think the fact that the studies were not done at the right time of the year would prove that that is a false statement. We have lived here at 128 Maple Ridge for 25 years, and the water course that runs on the south side of our property has never, ever once ran dry. Not in the height of the summer, in August, or at any other time. I have to urge you guys to consider that this is a very important aspect of this development, the subdivision. And the fact that that water course runs that way and needs to run that way is probably very contingent on that Indian River that runs back through the farm property and drains down naturally. Of course, we all know the landscape does drain from the west to the east, sloping to Georgian Bay. And it is really important, I believe, not to disturb that. And that comes from what we think is springs, natural springs on that lot that is being proposed there. And it is never dry in there, never, ever. So I am very concerned that the building of the density in there of the 3 lots plus the 4th that I assume is the original farm property, farmhouse that burned down, is very likely to disturb that natural course of water runoff. And that will have impacts to all the properties that abut it and the natural flow down there. I can also tell you that our observations, Kate's concern about climate change is real. And I do urge the township to consider that they have made a commitment to climate change and to monitoring it and to doing what they can about that. We have witnessed over the last couple summers, particularly, that this water runoff is not just a spring runoff problem. Like, as I said to you, it doesn't even dry up even in the summer. But the storms that are happening now to us because of the climate change impacts, we have witnessed these ditches filled to the top and running over the road in the last 2 summers because of the need for these water runoffs to happen. Let's face it, the climate change is not going to go away. This is probably not going to lessen for us, this impact. It's probably going to grow, which means this subdivision is going to continue to struggle with this water drainage problem, and it's probably only going to get worse. That's with the existing load that's here now. Adding 4 more properties and potentially disturbing what is even the natural runoff is potentially catastrophic. And that will be catastrophic, not only for the residents, but potentially for the township, because this could become extremely costly if this goes bad. So I do think you have made that commitment, and I'm going to urge you to strongly consider living up to that, you know, while we all understand that people want to develop their land, the primary motive here to fit 4 houses in after decades of sitting vacant is probably motivated monetarily, and we all get that. Land prices are at the premium, and that's what is driving this desire to do this. But we're asking for you to really give weight to the comments that have been made about the inconsistencies in the studies, the lack of information about how the mitigation steps will be done, the water pressure we repeatedly have mentioned. Our property has that defunct fire hydrant on it. It's a real disappointment that that has never been addressed after a long period of time by the township about that. We witnessed the fire department not being able to use that fire hydrant when the farmhouse burned down. And what if that had been one of the other homes in the subdivision? You have it here. It was put here for a reason. The water system was made eventually and did support it. My house is a test site. I was a test site for the water system, and then the fire hydrant is on my property. And the fact that it no longer works and can be relied upon for firefighting is more than upsetting. It's very negligent. I'm sorry to use such a harsh word, but it's negligent on the township's part to not address that. And so before you build any more development in here, I really urge you to consider addressing those issues first, and not have some kind of very unhappy consequences from it. The construction is the part that everybody has worried about, the road, not for more cars, as somebody mentioned there. It's the construction piece to the roadway that is the problem. The township hasn't done any road work on this subdivision in the 25 years plus that we've been here. There are school buses that come down in here still for kids. So it's a very narrow roadway. There are no shoulders. There are no gravel portions to walk on. It will, in fact, very much impact all of the residents in the subdivision for that construction period. And that could go on for quite an extended length of time. So we do hope you will give some consideration to the fact that we support that Georgian Bluffs is very proud of its natural habitats and its landscapes. And I know that on your website, you do mention the Indian Falls and the Indian River conservation area as one of the natural attractions of the area. And it very much was one of the primary reasons we located in this subdivision 25 plus years ago. We take great pride in keeping that area, clean and accessible to everybody, and that it's a natural aspect that needs to be maintained. And trying to squeeze in too many houses in this area, I think, puts it at risk. I mean, I think there needs to be the options looked at of whether a reduced number of dwellings is a more viable option and a better fit for the subdivision. I think that is something that we will hope you will give due course and review to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to move on to our last speaker here tonight, Mr. Gary Lawless. Are you there, please? Go ahead, Gary. Madam Clerk, is Gary still with us?
I do see that Mr. Lawless is still in the meeting. Mr. Lawless, you are muted. Okay, Mr. Mayor, it appears that either Mr. Lawless is no longer with us or struggling with his microphone. So if you'd like to continue on with your script, please.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I would like to thank everyone for their comments. Please note that the recommendation to this committee this evening is to receive the report and defer further consideration of the application pending completion of an archaeological assessment. All residents will be notified of further discussions regarding the application. I now call upon Ron Davison, planning consultant, to respond to the comments on the application. Mr. Davison, please go ahead. You want to comment?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, we've got a lot of, all the reports have been done. I don't consider it to be just a checkbox. There are, I'd call them standards that have to be met. And those reports have been done in accordance with provincial standards. We do realize that the archaeological assessment still has to be completed, and that will be done to the satisfaction of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We will be inviting them on site to participate in the on-site investigation. Obviously, that's not going to be able to happen for a couple months yet until the soil conditions are at the very least dry. I would, though, Mr. Mayor, like for John Morton to be able to just say a couple words to answer a couple of the comments that were made about the environmental impact study, if he may do so, please.
Please go ahead. John, we cannot hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now, John.
Okay, coming through?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, members of council and the general public. I am John Morton with Aquatic and Wildlife Services, born and raised and work in Georgian Bluffs. I was formerly with the Ministry of Natural Resources in Owen Sound for 10 years as an area biologist, ecologist, fish and wildlife management officer, and deputy conservation officer. I've been in private consulting now for 22 years. I have undertaken successfully probably 350 or more environmental impact studies from Manitoulin Island all the way down to Turkey Point over to Peterborough. I have been accepted on numerous occasions at Ontario Municipal Board hearings as an expert witness in regards to natural heritage features. I was also involved with training manuals for natural heritage, wetland evaluation impact studies. So I've got pretty extensive background locally in those aspects and even Georgian Bluffs. I wanted to just touch on briefly a couple of the comments that were made tonight. I do have all the written comments that come in regards to the environmental impact study. And just to keep it brief, the EIS followed all the provincial, county, and conservation authority protocol guidelines. It was accepted by those agencies. It was consistent with the PPS and the county official plan and the municipality zoning. So that's why those agencies also accepted it. In regards to a couple of comments tonight, Mr. David, if I wrote these down right, Mr. David Lewis made a couple of comments, and I think Mr. and Mrs. Kaufman kind of agreed. So I'm just going to touch on a couple. He felt 13 hours was insufficient. It's more than efficient. There's all kinds of studies that the Ministry of Natural Resources did, only 20 or 24 hours on a 300-acre natural heritage in ANSI. So in regards to that, yeah, there's plenty of time there. The key is to being there at the right time of year, whether it be dealing with breeding birds, nighttime activities with calling frogs, and so forth. So it followed the guidelines, it followed the process, it even followed the terms of reference that was already pre-approved. There was also questions brought forward about species at risk. He mentioned bobolink. There is no bobolink habitat. This is all forested. Bobolink require 30 hectares of open grass meadowlands. He talked about butternut. I did find a butternut that was on the Radburns property, but it's off-site. It's further to the west, and that's even shown in my report. There's a mapping included on Appendix 1, shows where that butternut is, and it's greater than 50 meters, which is the required setback under the Endangered Species Act. So that butternut cannot come into play with the studied lands. He also talked about spotted turtles. There's none of that there. There is a listing in Appendix 1 of all the records that is maintained by the Ministry of Natural Resources and the federal government in regards to species at risk. And that has been addressed. There was also questions in dealing with I think Mr. and Mrs. O'Reilly brought up concern about the intermittent stream course. I'm not sure whether there might have been some confusion or not in that regard. There are two stream courses on the property. The one that's in the central portion of the property comes off a groundwater discharge spring and seat, and it is a permanent water course. It does provide fish habitat. And because of that, in my EIS, I have recommended a 30-meter setback to that. The northern water course is intermittent. If you go to on the study land, maybe further downstream, it has more surface water input. But within the study land, I even have photographs in my report. You can go to it, and there's photo number 6, and it's bone dry in June. I'm standing there in running shoes. So and that was accepted by the conservation authorities. They also recognized, yes, the northern water course is intermittent. It's the central water course that is a permanent flow, and what's been kind of referenced in a lot of the comments and concern in dealing with the storm water. So there's got to be a difference of separation there. The northern water course is a 15-meter buffer zone because it's intermittent, and it did not have fisheries habitat associated to that. So I just wanted to clarify those aspects. There might have been some confusion on that part. Beyond that, I have read through all the objections in dealing with the environmental. Most of it dealt with common species. There was even a comment dealing with one individual brought up a plant, Terabelle. I think the gentleman needs to read my report a little better. It shows right in there, that's a non-native species. It's introduced, and there's no policy anywhere in Ontario where we get into protection of non-native species. So I just wanted to clarify that, and thank you for the opportunity to maybe address some of that confusion.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, I seen your hand was up and back down again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to recommend that rather than addressing all of the comments that have been raised here today, that staff take the comments and address them specifically in a written follow-up rather than moving through all of the comments and addressing them specifically.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and I tend to agree. Does Ron, do you have any other comments?
No, that's everything I have. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. David, I do see your hand up, but I do not want to let this meeting get out of hand and have comments coming back and forth. You did have your opportunity to state your concerns and so on, and I would like to leave it at that. If you have any other comments on, please submit them to our clerk. And Jen, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that both John Morton and Laura Swanson are subject matter experts. And as staff, I would defer to them to answer specific questions. I'm not qualified as a planner to address environmental impact study questions the way that Mr. Morton as a professional is. Additionally, Laura Swanson is a professional engineer. So I believe that if there are residents that have questions specific to those areas, that while we have those two experts on the meeting, that they be permitted to answer those questions. I will bring a staff report back with a summary of the questions. However, if there are specific questions that our residents have, they should ask them of those experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, for that. And I do agree. David, I'm going to very cautiously let you have the floor. David Lawless, please go ahead. You have a question, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll be very brief because I wanted to respond just because I was mentioned by name. And so I think it's kind of just to clarify the points that I was making. And I don't want to dispute, the expertise that John Morton gave, and I have no doubt that it followed the provincial guidelines. My only worry is that those provincial guidelines are fundamentally not comprehensive, and so it's not so much that it wasn't a proper study, it's just that you can only do so much with the time that you have. When I was making reference specifically to bobolinks, they were there when there was a barn there, and that was maybe 10 years ago. So if you lived in the area and walked those areas every day, it's a matter of seeing that. So I don't want to get into like the difference between semantics and syntax, but it is just important to kind of clarify where I was coming from. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dave, very much. I'm going to let our Madam CEO see your hand up. Please go ahead, Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I think there's been good questions and comments made. I think our subject matter experts, can provide clarification and advice. I do agree with the clerk, our Madam Clerk, that I think going back and forth too much without having documented questions and documented responses may not be as productive. So I do agree that we should probably follow up in writing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO. And I in no way was trying to cut anyone off. I'm just trying to sort of keep control of what we're doing. We've had some great comments here from all the people that registered, and all those questions will be answered. Ron, if there's nothing else, I'm going to move on to the agenda, and Deputy Mayor, we will get to our question period here in just a minute. Seeing nothing more from Ron, I'm going to move on. I see the Mr. and Mrs. Robburn are here. Any comments on your behalf? Madam Clerk, are they with us here tonight?
I do see that Mr. Dennis Radburn is logged into the meeting.
Dennis, any comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, I'll move on to our agenda.
Okay.
Okay, are there any points raised by the applicant or members of the public that committee would wish to respond? Now, I believe Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up.
I did, but I noticed Councillor Coburn had hers up first, so I wondered if she had a question first. I do have two questions I'd like clarification on.
As the chair, Deputy Mayor, I responded to you, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment to our planner. Jen, you made a comment about that rural zone having gone in there at some point, but that it was actually planned development first before that. So is that just an error in transposing over on maps and it should actually be planned development? Just wanted clarity on that first.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Deputy Mayor, that is correct. In our 2003 zoning bylaw, the property was zone plan development. And then when we went through the process of updating or getting a new zoning bylaw, it was rezoned to rural inadvertently. So we believe that's a mapping error. Given that
okay, so we had incidences of that happening in other areas too, where properties move forward with the wrong zoning. Okay, so it should actually be planned development. Okay, thank you. And my other question, a comment was made about peer review. If we were to ask for peer review on anything, who pays for that?
The township would take a deposit from the applicant to pay for the peer review. But what I would note is that nitrate study was completed in conformance with the D54 guidelines set out by the province. In fairness to Peter McCallum, they should be afforded an opportunity to respond to the comments that were presented tonight prior to us sending out a document for a peer review.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Burley. I had my hand raised initially because I was going to move that the procedure bylaw be waived in order to let Mr. Lawless continue on with subsequent comments. So I saw no purpose in trying to stifle the conversation. I'm glad that that did not happen, so I'll let that go. My question for Jen was exactly the same as Deputy Mayor Carlton's. I fail to understand, though, why that error was made in the zoning. It makes me wonder if it was just a technical error, or were there some criteria there in the first place that would automatically assign that rural zone to that particular area? And I do question us moving it back to residential unless it was an absolutely random, inexplicable glitch in the system. So I'll leave that for our planner. At this point in time, Chair Burley, I will definitely be looking towards some kind of possibility of a peer review that goes beyond the nitrate study. But also in terms of drainage and some other issues that have been very well brought forward by the members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn, and I agree 100% with your comments. I believe, Jen, do you want to reply to that before I go to Councillor Pringle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in response to the zoning, it was a mapping error. And so what happens sometimes with the when we're working on the GIS, the zones can be merged. So that might have been something that happened, or because it was an extension of a property that's predominantly zoned in NEC, the consultants could have made an error in attaching that zone to it. It has been within the settlement area boundary since before 1997, and I'd have to look into the Sarawak zoning bylaw to see how it was zoned prior to that. Right now, in our 2003 bylaw, it was identified as planned development right up until we brought in the bylaw in 2018, which was appealed and replaced with the 2020 bylaw. And it was something that we didn't notice at the time. Rural zones don't belong in settlement areas.
Thank you, Jen. Grant, can I allow Laura Swanson to respond to a question first? Okay, Laura, please go ahead. Laura, are you there?
If it would help, I could just provide written response to the comments that we've received to date, or would you like I can go through them? I just don't want to waste your time. So I'd be happy to provide a written response to the comments, or I could try and go through them and address them now if there's some of the concerns related to stormwater management.
I think as the clerk indicated, it would be nice if we had those response back in writing to our clerk.
All right.
And Councillor Pringle, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. They're more just a general comment, whatever. I'm not getting into too much specifics wise, but I did want to thank the residents for all their input here today. I thought there were some great comments made by everybody actually on the whole idea of the new lots being put in there. For me as a councillor, I kind of go back to the fact that it's the same old circle we seem to be getting into with the water issues in our township. And we can't, we can't supply water, enough pressure to the people that we have there now. And my biggest concern for me is it's a very aggressive development of 3 properties to go in that location with a possible 4th on the old site. And that's a lot of water to move to 4 residents. And again, as we've heard already, we can't hardly supply the people that are there. So my concern is moving forward, even though it is a very aggressive development of 3 on location, I'm concerned about the water issue for the properties, and then I'm also concerned about the water issues coming off the property. So I did have the opportunity to walk that property there probably 2 months ago, actually before the snow got to be too much. And there was a lot of concerns that I saw there. I do totally respect Laura and John's opinions as being the experts. I am no expert. I'm just a guy that was looking at the land. And, you know, I did notice a sinkhole in the one corner of the property. Just a couple observations. That's where I'm looking at right now. I'm more worried about supplying water and making water disappear as opposed to, you know, the fact that it's very aggressive to put 3 properties there. No, just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle. I'm really looking forward to our staff bringing back the reports to us on this to answer all these questions from our ratepayers, because I have a whole list of questions I have myself, which I'm looking forward to staff to bring that written response back to council. Does the committee have any other questions before I move on to our agenda here tonight? Seeing none? So I think I will move on. I have a recommendation here. Comments received from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation request that the applicant submit an archaeological assessment. In the absence of an archaeological assessment, consistency with the provincial policy statement 2020 cannot be determined at this time. It is recommended that PL 2022-09 public meeting report for Z 1721, B1121, B1221, B1321 for Radbourne be received for information, and any decision on the applications be deferred to a future date. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlson, second by Councillor Thompson. Excuse me. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the motion? The motion is carried. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. So I'm going to move on to our next public meeting. This meeting of the Committee of Adjustment to consider the application for minor variance for Chardell Lampka under Section 45 of the Planning Act regarding property located at 107 Gordon Owen Drive. Would the Deputy Secretary Treasurer please give your report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There have been no requests for deferral or withdrawal of this application. Notice of this minor variance hearing in accordance with Ontario Regulation 296 made under the Planning Act was given on January 19th, 2022 by ordinary mail to all property owners within 60 meters of the property which is subject to the application and to all the required agencies. Notice was also posted on the subject lands and the township's website. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the Committee of Adjustment, you must make a written request to the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee. Only a person or public body that requests a notice of decision of the committee in respect to this proposed minor variance may submit an appeal. So in terms of the planning report for this application, it's fairly straightforward. The property owner is applying to increase lot coverage from 5.5% to 6.7% and to increase the maximum permitted accessory structure lot coverage from 3 to 4%. What they want to do is they want to build a, it's about 105 square meter addition to the existing dwelling and have a covered and open decks on the property. The recommendation concludes that the application satisfies the 4 tests of a minor variance as required by the Planning Act. The report goes through the 4 tests. I won't review that as the report was made available to all of the committee members and has been posted online in the agenda. And the comments that we received, County of Grey have no concerns with the subject application. On behalf of both Planning and Transportation Services, they request a notice of any decision rendered with respect to this application. The Gray Sauble Conservation Authority note no natural hazards, natural heritage features, or regulated areas exist on the subject property. And the review of the grading and drainage plan for the site illustrates drainage on the lands will generally be maintained despite a minor increase of imperviousness on site related to the proposed construction. They have no objections to the approval of the application. The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation advised that they have no further comment on the project, though they ask if anything of archaeological interest is revealed on site, that they be contacted immediately. The Great Sauble Conservation Authority Risk Management Office noted the property is not located within a vulnerable source protection area where source protection policies apply. They have no concerns. We circulated the application to all property owners within 60 meters of the property, and we did not receive any written comments with respect to this application. The recommendation is that this application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Planner, please overview the applicant. Jen, are you, you're finished?
Yes, I just provided a review of the application.
Sorry. No members of the public register were declared to provide comments in support of or in opposition to the application. The applicant is not present. I now call for a motion. I'll read the recommendation. Application A0122 for Sherdell Lampka, requesting release from zoning bylaw 2020 to increase total permitted lot coverage from 5.5 to 6.7%, and to increase the maximum permitted accessory structure lot coverage from 3% to 4% to facilitate the construction of a plus or minus 105 meter addition to the existing dwelling and associated covered and open decks, satisfies the floor test of a minor variance as required by Planning Act ROS 1990 P13. It is recommended that application A0122 be approved. Someone to move, put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Councillor Barfoot. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the motion? The motion is carried. Before I go on to our next planning application, I see Edith Galloway on the line. Edith, you just amaze me. I don't know where you're sitting, but there's no snow around you. Sorry, I'll move ahead with our next, because you're muted. Okay, our next meeting is, this is a meeting of the Committee of Adjustment to consider application consent for Stacy Fidel under Section 53 of the Planning Act regarding property located at 230821 Cool Side Road. Madam Deputy Secretary Treasurer, please go ahead.
There have been no request for deferral or withdrawal of this application. Notice of this consent in accordance with Ontario Regulation 19796 made under the Planning Act was given on January 14th, 2022 by ordinary mail to all property owners within 60 meters of the property, which is subject to the application, and to all required agencies. Notice was also posted on the subject lands and the township's website. If you wish to be notified of the decision of the Committee of Adjustment, you must make a written request to the Secretary Treasurer of the Committee. Only a person or public body that requests a notice of decision of the committee in respect to this proposed consent may submit an appeal. So in terms of this application, this severance application proposes to create a parcel that is approximately 2 acres with about 100 meters of frontage on Grey Road 1. The property is located in Big Bay. And the recommendation is to approve the applications subject to the conditions noted in the in the report. When we look at the policies that apply to this application, we see that the property is designated. Sorry, I'm experiencing some feedback here. The property is designated rural in the County of Grey official plan. And lot creation is permitted. We calculated the minimum distance separation for the property. That's directed by the provincial policy statement as well as by the Grey County official plan. When we look at lot creation, we need to satisfy that the creation of a new lot will not negatively impact agricultural operations. The calculation was acceptable. The proposed lot is approximately 717 meters away from the nearest livestock facility. The actual setback required from that livestock facility would be 113 meters. So the Conservation Authority reviewed the application on behalf of the township, and their comments generally identify no related negative impacts are anticipated to arise from the proposed lot creation. They did note the potential occurrence of a threatened species on site, and they recommend consultation with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks in that regard. Excuse me. There is on the property under the county official plan, the Appendix E mapping indicates potential bedrock and shale resource area. The applicant had GM Blue Plan Engineering go out and conduct an assessment of the subject area. And in their letter, they note that the potential resource area does not constrain the proposed lot creation. So there's no opportunity for extraction to occur in that area. The application, so that this proposed lot frontage and the lot size comply with the required provisions in the zoning bylaw. That's why there's no associated zoning application with this. And just based on the review of the application and the comments received, the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It conforms with the applicable official plan, and it generally complies with the provisions of the zoning bylaw. The comments we received are as follows. The Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, they recommend several site layout and grading drainage considerations be made as part of a future development permit under their regulations to facilitate development of the proposed lot. A consultation with the ministry regarding the potential occurrence of a threatened species on site is further recommended. And the staff note they have no objection to the subject proposal for the severance of the 2.12 acre lot. They request a copy of the decision and notice of any appeals filed, excuse me. The Grey County Planning and Development Department note provided positive comments are received from the Conservation Authority, and the proponent applies for an entrance permit at the time of site development. The county has no further concerns with the subject application. They request notice of any decision rendered with respect to the application. Bell Canada has no concerns. Hydro One noted no concerns. Enbridge Gas did identify, excuse me, they have service lines running in the area which may or may not be affected by the proposed severance. They recommend confirming the location of natural gas pipelines be made through Ontario One Call. And they clarify that associated costs related to any relocation deemed necessary would be borne by the landowner. The Risk Management Office provided comments noting the property is not within a sensitive source protection area where policies apply. They have no further comment on the application. The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation advised that being the proposal is across the road from the water and not directly shoreline adjacent, they do not have further concerns on the project. They additionally request that if at any point anything of archaeological interest is revealed on site, please contact the SON Environment Office immediately. We circulated the application to all property owners within 60 meters of the subject property and received written comments from Edith Galloway and Jim Halliday. They share a tenant farmer, or they did share a tenant farmer with the subject, with the applicant. So they had concerns regarding access to the gates, corrals, and the cattle chute. Excuse me. So Edith Galloway is here this evening to provide comment, as is Stacy Spiegel, and provided there are no further objections, there are conditions noted in the staff report that the committee could consider including in any notice of decision, or sorry, in any decision on the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. One member of the public registered with the clerk to provide comments in support of or in opposition to applicant. Prior to submitting your comments to committee, please note your address for the records. Ms. Galloway, the floor is yours. Please go ahead, Edith. You're muted, Edith. You're still muted.
I'm unmuted now.
You're okay. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Burley and Deputy Mayor and councillors. Yes, I am in the bright sunshine. I'm Edith Galloway at 250784 Big Bay Side Road, Lot 37, Colpoys Range. And with Jim Halliday, we have owned the property east and south of Stacy Spiegel's property, Lot 36, since 1991. We have enjoyed excellent mutual tenant relationships for 31 years with the present and former landowners. And we are not objecting to the lawful rights of a property owner. However, we are welcomed and encouraged to speak by this public process, and we are further facilitated by this electronic hearing process, which is fabulous, that I can be the other side of the continent and be involved. And I want to thank the staff for the ability in applying this process to your meetings. I wear two hats in my address, and it's actually very brief. It's only 5 minutes, and you can thank Canada Post for that because they were very late in getting the notice to me. The two hats are, one is a property owner, and the other is really an advocate for our tenant farmers. Have our questions been addressed by the planner? Some have, others have not. Jen introduced the MDS report to clear up our concern that our barn was represented in the application as not currently used. And I worked very hard at that barn. We are proud that our livestock and facilities are well cared for, so I took a little exception to that error in the application. The original application did not make clear, but the summary now states the intent of the retained lot to be used is for summer pasture for cattle. So we're still going to have cattle on that property. One thing that Jan mentioned, that the Risk Management Office had no comment. but I actually read it where they identified concerns regarding ongoing tenant access to existing gates, corral, and cattle chute. Is that right, Jen? That's on page of your report, I believe on the under the risk management.
Jan, are you able to answer that now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Risk Management Office deals with source water protection. So their comments are specific that they have no further comments on the application because the property is not within a sensitive source protection area.
Okay, what I read further was that you also advised that each landowner is responsible for providing access to their own lands, for example, for use by any tenant farmer, and adjustments may be required where such access was previously facilitated informally across lands farmed in common. That's your quote, and I just wondered, before I go on, if you could explain that.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Edith. That basically means that if you no longer share an access with the adjacent farmer, you will have to apply for a farm entrance on your own property to allow your tenant farmer to access your property, as that tenant farmer will no longer be able to access through the neighbor's property.
Okay, well, it doesn't apply to us because we have accesses, but what about the tenant farmer? They would no longer have access because the property being severed contains the corral and the cattle chute and the entrance to Stacy Spiegel's property for the tenant farmer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, those are items, those are permissions that are on Mr. Spiegel's property, and those are for Mr. Spiegel to address. From a land use planning perspective, the creation of a new lot, either that Mr. Spiegel is applying for, it would be for him to be able to sell it or to develop it for a residential use. The township zoning bylaw and the procedure to create the lot doesn't have really to have any impact on that once it's approved. So I would defer to Mr. Spiegel to maybe discuss with you his intentions for those for the gates, the corral, and the cattle chute.
I guess it wouldn't be for me to discuss it with me, but to discuss it with the tenant farmer. Okay, I will proceed with my other hat, and that is as the property owner. And I say this, the biggest problem with severing a piece of your land is that the severed parcel is not carried away but in the arms of the new owner, like a puppy dog leaves your property. Do you understand what I'm saying? You sever the lot, but the lot still stays there. And more than often, it comes back to bite you. And I will just tell you what I mean by that. Yesterday, I spoke to Shane Forsyth, our sole tenant, and also I spoke with Bernie Wagner because the Wagners are sharing Stacy's pasture. And I would say they were both rather dazed by the announcement of this severance in this location. Outside of the loss and relocation of access facilities for them, they commented on the drainage of the land running to the northeast corner. And I also want to point out an error in the report here where the Gray Sauble Conservation refers to it in their material as the, on page 3, as the northwesterly corner of the lands. And it should, that's an error, it should be the northeasterly corner of the land. And so the Gray Sobel or the GCOP engineering report, it was quite extensive, and it really reports and backs up the bedrock on the property. And the Gray Sobel Conservation has a regulated area on the property, and it's a local wetland feature which runs along the mutual fence line. But the ditch is actually on the Galloway Halliday property. So the ditching is there. So the water flows through a large culvert under Gray Road 1 and down through the Scouts camp to the bay. That's the flow of the water. The fence line is a substantial pile. The fence line all the way back in the property is a substantial pile of stones and poison ivy, I might add. And it would obstruct drainage from Stacy's pasture. And it just flattens out, and there are no stones on the pasture when it enters the area of the corral. And then it flows to the culvert across Gray Road 1. So I asked, will this Gray Sobel Conservation Reference Plan site identify these concerns about water on the property and drainage? I know they'll identify the 30-meter setback on the property, but will they consider the potential of fill on the building site and its drainage impact? Because that lot is low and muddy, and all the water, I think Stacy will agree to this, basically flows from his property to the northeast corner where the corral is. And will they consider the potential of fill and what fill will do for the drainage of the water? That's one of our concerns. And when they're doing it, will they be looking at the property when it's not bright white with snow and obstructed by big snowplow drifts from Gray Road 1? So the other thing is in regard to when you get a new neighbor, what about fencing? If presently, when you share a tenant who has hay on one side, which is what our tenant is, and they have their cattle on the other side of the fence, they tend to look at managing the fence. If you get separate tenants, they don't care as much, and you get the cattle going into the adjacent property, which are field crops. And so I think fencing would be very important. Now, the other thing is when you look at the, going back to the policies affecting this property, and you look at page 2, and Jan mentioned the provincial policy statement, which is one area refers to healthy communities and protecting public health and safety. How long would it be before the new owner returns to this provincial policy statement, protecting health and safety, and state that the cattle manure runoff is contaminating the well water? So these are our concerns, and I believe this is why we have public input. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Edith, for your great comments. I'm now going to move ahead with our applicant, Stacy Spiegel. The floor is yours. Please go ahead, Stacy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to introduce myself to you and to the council members. We haven't had an opportunity to meet previously. My name is Stacy Spiegel. I'm an interactive media artist and a full-time occupant on my farm here on Gray Road 1 and Cole Side Road. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you and to assess my application.